Hello, today Tyrone Mcdonald has accepted an invitation to chat with me, Patricia, at Pea TV. I say chat, but he'll also be reading some of his work, and is a poet who was shortlisted for a Haiku Foundation Touchstone Individual Poems Award. Such a mouthful. I think you'll enjoy the quality of the work we're going to hear today. It was a real treat to talk with Tyrone. On paper, we should have had very little in common. He's an American, I'm a European, we have different cultural backgrounds. His African American, mine London Irish, with a heavy dose of Switzerland thrown in. And yet, well, you make up your mind, but I think we discovered shared common interests and experiences. We'll talk culture, we'll talk history, we'll have a laugh, and he'll make me cry, but in a good way, if that makes sense. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed talking to Tyrone. And if you'd like to read his poems, you'll find them in the show notes for this episode on the Poetry Pea website. So here we go then.
So today I'm joined by Tyrone Mcdonald. If you haven't read his work before, let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a terribly private poet, so here's what I've got. He's from Brooklyn, a Brooklyn resident, and his haiku and senryu and tanka have appeared in Modern Haiku, Bottle Rockets, Heron's Nest, Modern Tanka, the now defunct Raw Nerves, Black Bow, South by Southeast, Frog Pond, and Haiku Presents. And of course, he's been on the Touchstone Award shortlist in 2013 with, I think it was this poem, Tyrone, Morning Fog, When My Embryo Had Gills. Morning Fog, When My Embryo Had Gills. And that was from the Heron's Nest. Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting. I was looking at that one, Tyrone, and you've put an ellipsis after when my embryo had when my embryo ellipsis third line had gills. Right. I thought that was really intriguing, and it's going back a wee while, but do you remember why you punctuated like that?
Yeah, you know what? Because I wanted to invoke a sense of time passing, right? I didn't want to do either, let's say, an enjambment, which would have been too abrupt. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to leave anything at all. So an ellipse was actually, because, was the best, punctuation choice for me, because an ellipse, at least visually, kind of mimics a cloud, right? Or evanescence, right? Mm-hmm, like a mist. It does that.
It does, definitely.
It does that. And also, it kind of also displays like a certain time passing, And when you're talking about like, and we're talking about, I was essentially touching upon evolution, and I just never got the debate, which it seems to me like a debate within Western culture of creation and in evolution, as though they're diametrically opposed. And in my mind, they're not diametrically opposed. And what always fascinated me with human gestation is how that was its own microcosm of the evolutionary process. How we start from, let's say, one cell organism and become like this complicated mess that we are, eating, making love, and waging war, and building civilization, and making art, and doing all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So the ellipses, just to get back to that question, I just want to evoke this passage of time, and that was the best punctuation, to do so.
No, that's great. I was just intrigued because, punctuation doesn't get used an awful lot these days, but
no, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And I'm trying to sort of wage a little band of warriors to bring it back a little bit more, but I thought that was a really intriguing way of punctuating that poem. Thank you for that explanation.
Anytime.
So another one I want to talk about.
Sure.
Lunar Landing, Shipwreck of My Slave Name. I don't know if I've read that right. Is that how you broke it up? Lunar Landing, Lunar Landing, Shipwreck of My Slave Name. And that's from Roadrunner Haiku Journal. I thought that was a really, really interesting poem. Would you like to tell us a bit about it?
Absolutely, absolutely. At that time, it was like a number of things were going on, right? Because the theme of the poem just dealt with ancestry, particularly of African Americans and people in the African diaspora who were brought over as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and that break in identity, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because many people, you know, particularly Europeans and other people, they have their names, and even if you came to the United States as an indentured servant, you know, you can like find your lineage through your name, right?
Yes.
Which is always difficult for African Americans. You basically, your name basically relates to basically who owns your family. And the things I put lunar landing was to actually talk about the whole actually lunar landing, like in the 60s.
Yeah.
And the planting of the flag. And that to me always had reminded me of, like, let's say colonization, some strange reason, planting flags. And my whole experience is person of African ancestry was a colliding of those two worlds.
Yeah.
You know, was a colliding of those two worlds. And actually was also playing around with sci-fi, you know, a little bit. It's funny because in the 1990s, there was like, you know, in the late 90s, when a lot of haiku exchanges was done through like groups like Yahoo groups, and there was actually a sci-fi haiku group. And at first I thought this is kind of gimmicky, man. And I didn't take it seriously, but as the years going on, and with Roadrunner, and Roadrunner has been doing like a lot of experimental work, I actually gotten to the point where, you know what, this actually can be, you know, sci-fi themes can actually be used, you know, seriously.
Yes.
You know, and not be gimmicky, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that brought me to this one. So it was kind of like part, you know, Afrofuturistic or sci-fi, Afro sci-fi, and dealing with the whole subject of ancestry.
I had never really thought about it before until I read that poem. And it led to a great discussion between my husband and I. Exactly what you've just been saying. We can both trace our lineage way back to the year dot, practically, more or less, you know. But you, as you just said, your lineage, you can take it back to the point where there was a slave owner, and I'm guessing his name was McDonald.
Right.
And then where do you go from there? Are you able to go any further, or would it take a huge amount of work and effort, and then you'd never get anywhere?
Well, as far as, the most difficult part is when it comes to the historical part. Now, due to genetics, you know, and ancestral genetics, it's a little easier, you know, as far as that. But then the genetics, you know, you don't have the story, and you know, for people, the story is important. Yeah, you know, very important. You know. Yeah. And the story is where basically where the, you know, the struggle comes in, because a lot of times, it's particularly, you know, when it comes to topics of slavery and so forth, there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of pain that a lot of times families don't want to talk about. Okay. You know? Not just with slavery, but even after slavery, when you're talking about either Jim Crow, or when you talk about some type of displacement. So there's a lot of, you know, shame and a lot of pain that families don't want to talk about. And when you do, you know, go through your family history, and you reveal a lot of secrets that some people want it kept hidden, you know, so that part is very difficult. You know, the genetics part, you know, doing the DNA, that makes things easier, but we still need the stories.
Do you know what part of the world they originate from?
Like a bulk of it, as far as the African ancestry, both of it came from Nigeria, like 43%.
Okay.
Nigeria, Mali, 19%, Ghana, Togo, 19%. So a lot of that, you know, as far as the genetics, which is not, especially Nigeria being like the most populous nation. So that's not surprising.
Yeah.
But once again, I just went to the whole narrative. Is important, because as far as family history, I can only go as far as on my mother's side. I could probably only go as far as And they're from Trinidad, right?
Okay.
So my on my mother's side, my grandmother's mother, right?
Right.
And on my father's side, my father's grandfather, who funny enough was originally from like St. Vincent, and actually fought, I believe, in World War One. As a matter of fact, I think in England,
I was going to say he probably fought.
Yeah, he fought for the British, right?
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, what was kind of bizarre is when I got my father's old passport and it said British subject, you know.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
which is kind of wild, you know, when he passed away in 2004, and I was going through a stuff said British subject.
Wow.
You know, and that was a bit of that was a mind blower for me. You know?
So you had no idea.
I did know, but when something is in your face and it's tangible, you know, it's a whole different feeling.
Yeah.
Like I knew all the time, but when you say British subject,
I know. So my mother is Irish, but a British subject. But if you can actually probably go further back in your line than I can with mine. But I mean, because all the records got burnt in Ireland in the 1920s, right. I think. So, right. But if I had said to my grandmother, who was born in Ireland, if I'd said to her, Granny, you're actually British, you know, which she was, because of when she was born, oh, she'd have laid into me like nobody's business. She would, oh, dearie me. Anyway, right. that's a whole other podcast. I find that the haiku community is a fairly white community. But am I looking in the wrong places?
Yeah, I would say as far as like mainstream, in like English, as far as English speaking haiku, as far as like the official institutions, is white dominated, like, you know, Haiku Society of America and those places. However, just like with all things, if you would go into other spaces, like for example, you have what they call haiku slams. As a matter of fact, actually there's like a haiku slam dojos in which they give every year in the United States, nationally, and also in various cities. And you find like a lot of diversity there. You find like a heavy participation of African-American poets, Latino poets, South Asian poets, right? Within the United States, you find that, right? Also, like the Black Arts movement, in the late 60s, and the Black Arts movement was like the artistic consort of, let's say, the Black Power movement, where you had like poets and playwrights like Sonia Sanchez came out of that, Emery Baraka came out of that, and a couple other people who are still alive today, and particularly Sonia Sanchez and also Emery Baraka, even though they had like their own twist on haiku, they wrote haiku. You understand? You mentioned Richard Wright. I mean, African Americans were writing haiku since the Harlem Renaissance, right? So yeah, if you go to certain spaces, you're gonna find you know, a lot of activity. And you know, I credit like Sonia Sanchez because she, particularly in like in the African American community, she done a lot in terms of like expanding, you know, the awareness of it, you know, and so forth. But yeah, but it's where it's definitely where you go, and that's just the United States. Now, if you go globally, India has like a very active haiku community in India. What's going on?
Oh yeah.
In West Africa, if you go to like Nigeria and Ghana, they actually have like a real active like haiku community there, like within the last 15 years. So, and that's outside the United States, and this is in English, you know. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be exploring, we're going to have some readings from West Africa. West Africa later in the series. So that's, I'm looking forward to that and exploring that. And as you know, I will be going to South Africa, and I'm very much hoping that I'll meet some haiku poets while I'm over there too.
Actually, I got into haiku as a rebellion because I came out of the whole spoken word scene.
Okay.
I had a friend, his name is Benum. Mark Benum. He goes by the name of Benum, and we had like this whole jazz poetry, like monthly series in which we would have like poetry to live music, mostly
Oh,
jazz
okay.
musicians, right?
Mhm.
And we also have features, some popular poets, spoken word poets like Saul Williams. They became, who became popular afterwards, came through that.
Mhm.
So, and I wanted to do haiku as a rebellion against spoken word,
Okay.
because spoken word is like can be very flamboyant, a lot of narrative, very, very, very the imagery, heavy on imagery.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
And you juxtapose that with haiku, which is very like laconic, and it's more quiet and it's more meditative.
Mhm.
So I wanted to do it as a rebellion, against that. And I think I was reading, I think it was a Japanese haiku, and I was just completely blown away in terms of the brevity. It just left me speechless. And the thing about what was good about haiku is it's accessible, right? At the same time. So it's not intimidating. However, it's not something which is a walk in the park. It's not a pushover either. So that's how I got into it. And then I wanted to find like journals because I just wanted to hone my craft more. And I think Black Bow was probably one of the earliest journals. And actually, Black Bow, the editor was based out in New Jersey, was like one of the first ones actually I got published. And this is like in 1990, going into like the 2000. It was some work. It was an adjustment. Like many of us, we were all indoctrinated with the 575.
Yes.
And I had to break out of that. And I was so glad and so elated when I learned it didn't have to be 575. I was so elated. I did have an impulse to like try to be experimental, but I had to learn the form first. And it's kind of like what some of the jazz musicians said, first you learn the rules and you learn to break them.
Yes.
So I think I'm comfortable where I can actually break them. Break them comfortably. Where early on, I think I think I was more finding my way.
I started the same as you, indoctrinated with the idea of 575. And thank goodness there was a wonderful English poet who said to me, you should probably just forget that idea. You don't have to do that.
Right.
You'll probably find it flows much better if you just do your own thing to a certain extent within, like you said, within the form. But then I was reading today, and I'm not going to be able to read it in any way, shape or form like Etheridge Knight wrote it, but tying in that idea of 17 syllables and the jazz, putting them together, he wrote a poem, and it's in his Essential Etheridge Knight book, published in 1986, and it was making jazz swing in 17 syllables ain't no square poet's job. My accent's just wrong to do that, but I just read that, and you talking about the jazz, it's sort of there seems to be sort of a more rhythmical feel about their work, a more jazz feel maybe often.
Yeah. That's definitely true because they come out of the Black Arts movement, right? And the Black Arts movement, similar to the Harlem Renaissance, which the whole point of it was like to actually draw upon the ethos of Black culture, so jazz, blues. So it was very rhythmical, very rhythmical. As a matter of fact, some people argue would debate it, would it even be called haiku? Is it just like a shorter poem? And there's like a lot of debate on that. And that's one thing I struggle with personally, because I struggled with at what point, what is the fulcrum, right, of where something is haiku and it's something else.
Another question I ask myself sometimes is, should we be making the distinction between haiku and maybe micro poetry? The Swiss in me says, oh yes, we should, there are rules, we've got to keep rules.
Right.
But then I think, well, as you said, rules are sort of there, you learn them and then you push against them, don't you? I've taken up enough time. People want to hear you read your poetry.
Sure.
So are you ready? Would you like to kick off?
The Butcher's Compliment. So soft, the sawdust under my feet. The butcher's compliment. So soft, the sawdust under my feet. Thanksgiving dinner. We pretend not to hear the fire engines. Thanksgiving dinner. We pretend not to hear the fire engines. No-fly zone. Am I a terrorist for daydreaming? No-fly zone. Am I a terrorist for daydreaming? Stars begin to fade. So much music from unseen birds. Stars begin to fade. So much music from unseen birds.
I wanted to go back and have a look at the story of a couple of them. Thanksgiving dinner. In your poem, you've got this in my head, quite a tense situation anyway of a Thanksgiving dinner. And then you've added more tension by sticking the fire engines in there. And I wondered, is that like a scene from life, or how did you put that together?
Yeah, it is actually a scene from life. I remember very vividly, it was Thanksgiving dinner. It was like Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And I was by myself because I don't personally celebrate Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
But I was by myself, right? And I remember the sound of fire engines,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that struck me because in that poem, I wanted to talk about the ways in which we, as people, we block out like misery, and we block out like just unfortunate things to maintain our sanity,
Mm-hmm.
and also to maintain our grip on life. You know, we just block, all these things are happening simultaneously. You have a Thanksgiving dinner in which, and you're right, many Thanksgiving dinners are actually, there's some tension, family tensions, there's family issues that you have. Your brother did something, that you don't like, you got to see them again. And so you do have like that unspoken rifts there. And then going on simultaneously, somebody else is undergoing a whole tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times we try to block that out, to try to maintain our sense of happiness.
Mm.
So that's what I wanted to capture there.
And then the butcher's compliment, so soft the sawdust under my feet. I love the way you read that second line, so soft the sawdust under my feet. I was intrigued by this one, and I'm pretty sure it probably wasn't what you had in mind. When I read it, I felt, being a woman of a certain age, that this could be written about a woman of a certain age where she's gone to the butcher's and he's given her a compliment. And it's the first time she feels seen for the first time in a long time. Because once you get to a certain age, nobody looks at you, which I think is fantastic. But some people don't like that. So I could just see that in my story, that's what was going on. What was the story behind it in your head?
That was drawn from history.
Uh-huh.
A lot has changed now with butcher shops or abattoirs now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot has changed because
Mm-hmm.
they're more cleaner. But there was a time in which, at least in New York City, and I'm not sure if it's the same was in England or Switzerland, but I heard, Switzerland has a big reputation of being clean.
Oh,
so
yeah, very clean place.
Didn't happen there. But
It did in London. It did in London.
But when you go to a butcher shop, don't be surprised if you have like sawdust,
Mm-hmm.
like on the shopping floor, right?
Yeah.
You have sawdust,
Yeah.
and I remember being so soft. When you go into these shops, you have these mostly guys, and they'll have like the apron on, and the apron will be bloody or messed up, and they'll have these nice conversations with the people in the store, mostly women,
Mm-hmm.
because women usually come in there, for the weekly meal, get their weekly supply of meat, or for Sunday dinner, which is a big thing, at least in my community, big thing, Sunday dinner, your oxtail or your beef or whatever the case may be. And you have like this nice little conversation. So that always struck me. once again, you know, you have these multiple things going on. You have, you know, butcher shops, so you have this you know, slaughter going on, or maybe not there, but you know, you're dealing with meat, you're trading in meat and blood.
Yeah.
But then again, you know, you have these wonderful personalities, you know, compliments, you know, how you doing today, and you know, and you have like these warm exchanges going on at the same time, and
Yeah.
and you have the sawdust was so soft.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
you
was. It was. And then the next one I wanted to ask you about was no-fly zone. Am I a terrorist for daydreaming? And I imagine that came out of the 9/11 situation, or am I wrong?
Yes, you are right. 9/11, also Iraq. All right.
Okay.
Because I remember I actually was there. I actually saw the buildings falling during 9/11. And there was like a no-fly zone, you know, in I know in New York and in much of the United States. There was like a no-fly zone. But also Iraq, because at the invasion of Iraq in 1991, in the northern part, with you know, with the Kurdish ethnic groups, or in the southern part, the U.S., Britain, and France, they imposed a no-fly zone there, which actually lasted up until the second invasion, up until, was it 2003, right? Yeah. And so that whole notion of no-fly zone was actually a theme of this militarization in the culture, you know, because after 9/11, there was the, at least in the U.S., there was a complete militarization. You know, you got used to seeing National Guards everywhere, which something, you know, you didn't see. And that particular haiku was submitted for Peace is a Haiku Song, which was a mural project coordinated by Sonia Sanchez.
Okay.
And which she was taking various haikus submitted from all around the world. And they decided whether or not they will put this on a mural in Philadelphia. And if you ever go to Philadelphia, you should, because they have like these amazing murals, amazing murals. And as a counterpart, they also had an anthology. So the whole thing was peace. So I wrote that just to discuss how militarized the culture was being, such to the effect that even the imagination, imagine the imagination being militarized, that if you think, even innocently, it doesn't even have to be intentional, you know, you don't have to be intentionally political, but just innocently, you know, think of something which is not in alignment with what the culture is, that you are deemed a combatant, you're deemed a terrorist.
Yes.
You know, you're deemed, and you know, so that's what I was playing around with, you know, with that.
It takes me back to my childhood when being Irish in London. Obviously, there was a lot of terrorist activity in London, and it was the IRA. And I used to be so scared when I was on my way to school, because obviously all my school books would have my name all over them, that somebody would see my name, because a very prominent Irish terrorist has the same name as me. No relation, I would just like to point out. But just as a child, I was so scared. You said, am I a terrorist for daydreaming? And I was back on the bus to school, looking, daydreaming out the window, but knowing that my bag with my books and my name were just next to me. So it hit me, not for the same reasons it hit you, but I thank you for that. It's really interesting where we can go with somebody else's work. It's wonderful.
I'm glad it actually touched you in that way, because it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember years ago, I was in a mall. And this was, once again, in the early 90s. I was in a mall, and this was during the first Iraqi invasion by the US.
Okay.
And in the mall, they made an announcement. They were calling somebody by the name, and the name was Hussein, you know, and they were calling them. And I just remembered the moment, you know, how that person probably felt.
Should we go into our next selection?
The man who left is the man who came home. My cat sniffs anyway. The man who left is the man who came home. My cat sniffs anyway. Shrine for Shango, for the ladybug, a cemetery. Shrine for Shango, for the ladybug, a cemetery.
I was interested in the culture, possibly the cultural reference
Sure.
in this one. Tell us about Shango. What is Shango?
Well, Shango is one of the Orishas, right? And Orisha is a spiritual system out of present Nigeria, West Africa, and also Benin, right?
Okay.
And it's over 401, and Shango is one of the primary ones. And actually, Shango has actually survived the transatlantic slave trade in modern Caribbean, parts of America, Brazil, and so forth. Because you have like the spiritual story,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also have the historical story. Now, Shango was actually a king in the Oyo Empire, which is actually in present-day Benin. In the Orisha spirituality, Shango represents dominion, authority, your personal power, all right, affiliated with things like lightning, and also the double axe.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one of his implements is the double axe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And his colors are normally red and white. All right. Shango is known for being very strategic. He's also lover of life itself. Like dance is also one of the things affiliated with him. In Nigeria, there's a drum called a bata drum, a specific drum, which is the drum of Shango. So dance and so forth. So in this instance, I was given by an Orisha priest. He was also he does like a lot of woodwork, and he actually made like the double axes of Shango in red and white and gave it to me, right? And one day it was like a ladybug actually passed away near the axe, because the axes below there was like this red cloth, and the ladybug passed away. Mm-hmm. And it caught me because the ladybug looked so at peace, even though it passed away. It looked so at peace, like it belonged there.
Yeah.
Just the whole color arrangement.
Yeah.
And it just struck me as that here is something which is actually a symbol to remind me that you have personal power, not absolute power, but you also have personal power. Mm-hmm. You have choice. You're not completely a victim.
Yes. And
you had this ladybug who actually passed away, who actually chose to pass away on this thing. So it was a cemetery for this ladybug. So it just struck me of the perspective of life.
Yeah.
For me, it went one thing. For the ladybug, it was a cemetery.
I sometimes write haiku with a reference that somebody would have to go to Google and look up. And I sometimes worry that that's not in keeping with the haiku tradition. Mm-hmm. I had to go and look up Shango, which was really interesting. Thank you. Mm-hmm. But how do you feel about that? Do you think it's still valid to use a reference that somebody has to go away and research in your haiku? What are your thoughts on that?
Like, I never seen it as a conflict, because the thing is that as global haiku becomes, we're going to run into like certain references or certain items and objects in which we may not be necessarily, privy to, so, even if it's within the English language, we're not necessarily be privy to. So I just never, just seen that as an obstacle. Good. And also, this is not the first time the Orisha has actually been mentioned in haiku. As a matter of fact, Elizabeth Sarah Lamb, she did a renku, which discussed her experience in Nigeria. Okay. And in that haiku, she actually referenced Legba, who's the Orisha of the crossroads, and she also referenced Ifa, which is the divination system, but also the Orisha actually governs divination. So she actually referenced that. Okay. Years ago,
I'm gonna have to look that up now.
Yeah. It was actually in a haiku handbook by Higginson. Learning gratitude. A gentle breeze on an August night. Learning gratitude. A gentle breeze on an August night. Geese going, gone. The thought of filling my father's shoes. Geese, going, gone, the thought of filling my father's shoes.
Now, I put those together because of the Kegos.
Right.
And I just wanted, well, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, how do you feel about seasonal word in haiku? Do you think they're necessary?
I don't think they're always necessary. And this is my personal opinion, always necessary. However, I use them personally because I always want to point out like our direct influence and also our direct like synchronicity with the natural world, you know, and the natural seasons. I also want, you know, to point that out. So I use them, you know. Sometimes it may be a little bit more subtle. So rather than saying that you know, talk about a snowflake, I may talk about a goose down coat, you know. So I may not necessarily be as direct, but I know I personally like to use that, and I hope that continues. Do I always use it? No, I don't necessarily always use it.
The geese going gone poem, Geese Going Gone, the thought of filling my father's shoes, brought a lot of comment. And I'm so grateful again to Kurt for telling me. And I don't know if this was in your head, but it passed me by. I live near a lake and I often go down to the lake at the time when the geese are migrating. I had that season in mind. I had that picture in mind. But he told me that the going gone is a sort of baseball terminology possibly. And this poem seasonally for him was baseball playoff seasons. Was that in your mind when you were writing it?
Yeah, actually, he is right. Like the whole term is actually when somebody hits a home run. I was still discussing the geese, but I was just creatively playing around with it. But yeah, he is right. He's right.
Well, in that case, that's interesting because he was then speculating if it was the baseball thing. Was your father a big fan of baseball, and is that how you made that juxtaposition? How you came with that link? How did you come upon that link? The geese going on and the thought of filling your father's shoes.
You know, geese deal with migration, and the thought is, as we all do, is what will happen if your parents pass away, and are you up to the challenge of continue their legacy?
Yeah.
Or filling in their shoes, whether it's being the foundation of your family, whether it's honoring their wishes, whatever the case may be. So that's what came to me, when I and I remember because I currently live in Brooklyn. Not too far in Brooklyn, you have Jamaica Bay, where you have like a lot of animals and so forth. So it's not unusual, even though we're in an urban area, and I was always caught by like geese, just migrating. And when it would go, our floor was filled with like this emptiness and this little sadness, like when they would go.
Yeah.
When it would pass, when you start hearing them honking,
But I also wondered, before I knew about the baseball thing, I wondered if your family migrated to Brooklyn from somewhere, so that you're specifically your parents, and so the geese going gone is a bit like that sort of migration feeling of your parents coming into New York.
So it was actually death, death. I was thinking, okay, that's always been on my mind with my parents. What would you do if your parents pass away? And that's always been hovering over me. And the geese just brought that out, and reminded me of that.
Oh wow!
This togetherness, and then they were just gone. What swallows me more, this vacant lot, or the baby in my arms? What swallows me more, this vacant lot, or the baby in my arms? Watching stars, I think of mice and the crumbs they live on. Watching stars, I think of mice and the crumbs they live on.
Now, you just said that geese going gone was about death. And bizarrely, probably, I worry about death when I read What Swallows Me More, This Vacant Lot, or The Baby in My Arms. Probably in a reverse situation. You're worrying about what's going to happen with your parents die in the previous one. And here, when I read that, I was just overwhelmed by sadness, just at the thought that one day, as big as my kids get, you know, as old as my kids get, they're still my babies. And one day I'm not going to be there, and I'm not going to be there to protect them. Oh, I feel a bit tearful even just thinking about it now. And this poem really brought that out for me. But maybe that's probably not what you were thinking when you wrote it.
Let me tell you the story behind that poem. There's a photographer, right? African American photographer by the name of Roy DeCarava. You know, he's born in Harlem, and you know, he worked with the WP, the workers, the WP workers. Can't remember what the PA stands for, but it was basically for artists during the Great Depression. They employed artists, and he was part of that.
Okay.
So he had a photo called Graduation, in which he had, it was a Black woman it was a black and white photo in a wedding dress, and it was sparkling white, and she was in this vacant lot. And that photo always stuck with me. Okay. And it always stuck with me, right? So one day in Brooklyn on Church Avenue, I was walking, and I actually saw a young man. He was probably a teenager, holding a baby, and he was in front of a vacant lot, right? Being that I was already, you know, predisposed and impacted by Carava's photo, that image of the young man holding his baby caught my eye, and that's how I wrote that. So you have two situations here. You know, he was so absorbed, you know, by his brother and taking care of his brother and nurturing his brother, and then he was right next to a lot which was visually swallowing him. So that's how that poem came about. You know? But you aren't too far off.
But also what I wanted to talk to you about with this one is, well, both of these, What Swallows Me More and Watching Stars, I think of mice and the crumbs they live on, is that they're one, to me anyway, they're one image poems. I had a question asked to me, and actually it's not just about your poems, but I get asked a lot. How is it one image haiku get published? Because I think a lot of people don't like them. They don't see them as haiku or senryu.
Right.
Again, we go back to that discussion we were having before. What is haiku and what is micro poetry, whatever. But I want to stand up for the one image poem. I think they are very valid as haiku or senryu. They have to work harder, perhaps, and you have to be more skillful to make them work. I think Ferris Gilly said about them, a skillful poet can achieve resonance with a single topic poem. However, because it's difficult to create resonance without effective juxtaposition, she advises beginners to first become proficient at writing two-part haiku. What these poems show us is that you are strong as a haiku poet, and you can use that one image and create haiku from it. I wondered, what are your thoughts on the one image idea?
Yeah. Actually, if you look closely within the one image, there is a juxtaposition, right? Okay. There is a split, there is a kerigi. However, the kerigi is with the image itself, right? There's usually some type of transition, but it's very subtle. There is a juxtaposition there. And I do agree with you that what also makes a one image poem works is you have to have what they call, like, lack of a better word, haiku or some type of transcendence where expands your awareness.
Yes.
You understand? Definitely expands your awareness. So with the first one, you know, What Swallows Me More, the vacant lot. So you have the juxtaposition of a vacant lot, the image, you have a vacant lot image, and then you have an image of a baby in somebody's arms, right?
Yeah, okay.
So there is, you know, there is a juxtaposition there, but it you know, it is a little bit more sleight of hand, you know, than other poems, which are, you know, is much more obvious. You know, the break is much more obvious.
Yeah. I suppose the same could be said of watching stars as well. Forgive me. Before we finish, though, I wanted just to share something that one of our community wrote to me when she found out that I was talking to you. Marcia Moldovan wrote to me and said, "This is my favorite of Tyrone Mcdonald's poems," and I'll just read it to you. Yeah. "I wonder if wind is even necessary. cherry blossoms. I wonder if wind is even necessary. Cherry blossoms. And that's from The Heron's Nest. That's another beautiful one. And it's so hard to write an original, interesting blossom poem, isn't it?
It is. It is. And one thing, like the rebellious streak in me, for many years, I actually stayed away from cherry blossom poems because I didn't want to seem like a poser. You know, I didn't want to seem like a poser. I didn't want to seem, you know, like I'm a Nippon Philic. You know, I didn't want to seem like that. And I said, if I'm going to write a cherry blossom poem, it's going to have to be authentic to me.
Yeah.
And what happened was my first cherry blossom poem was actually published in I remember Stan and Bottle Rockets did a whole series on plants and flowers.
Yeah.
And that was the first, not that one, was another cherry blossom poem actually was published there. And it was actually my experience in DC, because if you go to DC, Washington, DC, during like April, they have like cherry blossoms all over the place.
Yeah.
And what I was told, the history behind that was that it was a gift from the Emperor of Japan, you know.
Yes, so I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, he gifted that to the United States, you know, as a measure of peace, you know, and it's wonderful. So that was my first, you know, cherry blossom poem. I think the poem went like this. It went, slave cemetery, the obliviousness of cherry blossoms. Slave cemetery, the obliviousness of cherry blossoms. And because also while I was in DC, there was also a book regarding unnamed like slave cemeteries in DC. So when I was there and I saw all these, you know, cherry blossoms, this lovely landscape, I said to myself, you know what? There's some slave cemeteries here, you know, and that's what brought the poems. That was actually my first cherry blossom poem that I ever wrote. And what happened is that as the years went by, people started planting them in the neighborhood. So it wasn't something which I was estranged to, but something which actually was part of my everyday life. So
Tyrone, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you. And before you go, I was going to ask you to read No Fly Zone, because up until this point, it was the one that hit me most. But when I heard you read What Swallows Me More, I've changed my mind. Can we have What Swallows Me More again, please?
Sure. No, not a problem. You got it. You got it. You got it. What swallows me more, this vacant lot or the baby in my arms? What swallows me more, this vacant lot or the baby in my arms?
That's so lovely. I'm going to need a hanky in a minute. Just
No problem.
Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you very much. I'd love talking to you. I hope you'll come back and read to us again. This was absolutely super.
Absolutely. You know, just send me an email and I'll love to come back and just to share my work.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Once again, thanks to Tyrone for coming along and visiting with us. I really hope we'll hear from him again, don't you? Next month, if the internet fairies are kind to me and the COVID monsters don't get in the way, we'll be chatting with another wonderful poet and hearing his or her work. But in the meantime, do go over to the Haiku Peak podcast and find out what we're up to there. And most importantly, keep writing. And if I've forgotten to put something in the show notes, just send me an email and I'll sort it out for you. Ciao!